For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane, Dhlamini. Section 27 Attorney Sasha Stevenson joins me to discuss the outcome of an investigation into the deaths of mentally ill patients transferred by Gauteng Department of Health from the Life Esidimeni facility to several NGOs last year. Former Gauteng MEC for Health, Qedani Mahlangu, has resigned after a damning report by the Health Ombusdman, Professor Makgalepuru Makhoba. Please explain the background to the Health Ombusdman report. What exactly happened that led to this report?
So in October 2015, the MEC announced that she was going to terminate the contract with Life Esidimeni and move everybody at Life Esidimeni into NGOs, to their families, or to state hospitals. This plan had been in the works for some time, and she had been warned against it by the South African Society of Psychiatrists that drew her attention to the significant risks involved in deinstitutionalizing patients without building up community-based care at the same time, taking patients out of an institution but then putting them somewhere that they couldn't be cared for. So they'd raised those concerns, but the MEC went ahead anyway. We, together with our clients who were family members of people at Life Healthcare and various other civil society organizations involved in mental health, started to engage with the department to try and slow the process down, to ensure that a plan was in place and to ensure that families were consulted with. In December 2015, we represented our clients taking the department to court because they seemed not to want to consult, to provide information, and to reveal their plans or to develop plans to ensure that this process could happen safely. We entered into a settlement agreement in terms of which the department agreed to do so. We continued negotiating, but in March 2016 it was announced that 54 patients were going to be moved to Qedani NGO. There had been no consultation about this. The NGO at that time was only for children. These were adults going to the NGO with a variety of significant mental health issues that they would need care for. And the department didn't have a plan to ensure care. They assured the court that these patients were not unwell, that they would ordinarily be discharged to their homes, but for the fact that they didn't have families. It later turned out that a number of them did have families, and that they had serious mental health concerns that would require a high level of care, and we found out with the Ombud yesterday that 12 people died at that NGO. Following March, the department decided to extend the contract so that it terminated in June, and between May and June it was about 1,300 people, I think, who were discharged from Life Esidimeni and put into various NGOs around the province. The department at that point had stopped engaging with our clients. They wouldn't provide any information. We didn't know where these NGOs were. The family committee visited a couple of the NGOs that they knew about, but not nearly all of the NGOs, and everyone just got scattered across the province. Some families didn't know where their family members had gone. They found out much later. One family member only found out that her sister had been transferred to Precious Angels after her sister had died. And a week later, the owner of the NGO called her and said, "Your sister's died, and by the way, she was at my NGO. Christine thought she was somewhere else." So that's when we found out about the deaths. And in September 2016, in response to a question in Parliament, the MEC revealed that 36 people had died. It has now turned out that at that point 77 people had in fact died. The Minister of Health appointed the Health Ombud to investigate this case. We referred a number of the deaths to inquest to ascertain whether deaths were due to other than natural causes, and we come up to yesterday where the Ombud released the report of his investigation into these deaths.
What were the conditions of the NGOs where the patients died after being transferred from Life Esidimeni healthcare facility? Were you aware that these NGOs were not legally registered?
We weren't aware that they weren't registered. We know from our clients whose family members were at the NGOs what some of the conditions were, and our clients told us that many of the NGOs were cold. Their family members didn't have warm clothes, they didn't have blankets, the food was insufficient. Really importantly, it seemed like a lot of the medical records hadn't gone with the patients from Life Esidimeni to the NGOs, and so the NGOs didn't know what the medical requirements of the patients were. People were getting the wrong medication or no medication. They were falling behind on their treatment and having to be admitted to hospital. So there were a lot of problems with these NGOs, and those problems were raised with the department time and time again.
Are there still patients who are being looked after in these unregistered facilities in Gauteng? If so, what relief should they seek?
So the Ombud made recommendations on that yesterday. What he said was that a number of NGOs have been closed, 4 NGOs were closed, but that there was still probably over 1,000 patients in various NGOs, all of which were improperly licensed. What he said was that the department has 45 days in which to make a plan to get patients out of unlicensed NGOs. And what that would mean would be getting them essentially, I think, into state facilities, which are already overcrowded. And so there's a real problem here, because what the department has done is it's cut out a level of care that was required. It's cut out provision of chronic mental health care services for people who need that kind of service and who need it at a higher level than community-based care, where they can largely take care of themselves. That level of care was provided by Life Healthcare Esidimeni. That's no longer there, and now we're going to have to scramble to fit these patients into the rest of the system.
What should happen now to compensate the bereaved families of those patients who have died?
Well, that's an issue that we're looking at with our clients. We received the report yesterday, we're studying it carefully, we're consulting with our clients, and we're trying to ascertain what our clients want and what makes most sense in the circumstances in terms of further legal steps. But it's important, I think, that there are a few things done. There needs to be accountability for this, because there are individuals who made very bad decisions against all advice, and they need to be held accountable for that in various different ways. We also need to recognize that there's a systemic problem. The Ombud talked about a culture of fear within the Gauteng Department of Health, where people weren't prepared to stand up against higher ups in that department. That's a huge problem and needs to be resolved for us to have accountable and responsive government. And then we also need to look at the mental health care system as a whole and ensure this doesn't happen again by putting systems in place, ensuring that facilities are there, ensuring that health professionals who have an obligation to do so speak up when they see that there's a risk to their patients.
Do you have any comment on the former health MEC's statement and on her decision to resign?
I'm glad that the MEC has taken political responsibility for her actions here. I think that's admirable, and it doesn't happen often enough, quite frankly. But at the same time, that's not even nearly enough. The MEC said in her statement yesterday that she thinks that the report didn't find her personally responsible for what happened. And that seems disingenuous, given the statements of the Ombud that her fingerprints and the fingerprints of others were peppered all over the issue. It seems quite clear that the MEC was very much driving this project and knew what was happening, and yet continued the project despite all indications that she should stop doing so.
What lessons should be learned from this tragedy, and how could similar incidents be avoided in future?
I think if one lesson can be learned, it should be that mental health care service users are like every other person in this country. They need to be taken care of, and we need, as a society and as a government, to ensure that systems and processes are in place to make sure that they're safe. I'm so glad that the Ombud's report was bold, that the findings and the recommendations made sense in the light of this huge tragedy, and that it's drawn attention to what's happened here. And I hope that attention will mean that we change the systems to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
That was Section 27 Attorney Sasha Stevenson speaking to Crima Media's Polity about the Health Ombud report.